Alright, welcome back to our Ask Propertylimbrothers Season 2, and today we are back with a new episode talking about 11 things that you might need to know before selling your home. Let's go.
Propertylim.
Ask Propertylimbrothers. Alright, so selling a home I think consists of two parts. First part is your planning phase. Second part is your preparation phase. So we're going to talk about 11 things that we think are very important for you before you even commence selling your home. Because this is a big project and we think that nothing should be taken lightly when it comes to home moving and planning. The planning phase as the first 5 steps plus the preparation phase as the next 6 steps. All in all, 11 steps for you today. So why don't we kickstart with step 1 of the planning phase. So step 1, list down all your preferences and requirements. Now, the general assumption here is that you are planning to shift from your current primary residence, that means your main property that you and your family are living in, into your next home. Perhaps it's because of a lifestyle change, or perhaps it's because you now have more family members, you have more kids, and space is getting very limited in your current place. You might need an additional bedroom, or it is because of the school needs, because one of your child is going to a primary school, and because of the 1 kilometers preference, you might need to shift. So today's example on the 11 steps will be based on the assumption that this is for your primary residence, because if we are talking about your investment property, then there will be an entire whole set of different preferences and requirements. So back to your primary residence, I think the very first thing is that you need to list down a whole set of preferences, needs and wants that you and your spouse will need for your family, because this is a very important process. A lot of times when we serve our clients, when we bring buyers on the market, sometimes after viewing for a little while, you might have a set of your own preference, your spouse might have a set of their own preference, and sometimes conflict might arise. So I think it's very important that you guys can sit down first, list down the entire list of preference that you think in the mid to long term will be very beneficial for your family. So for example, do you want to live very near to a train station? Do you guys drive? Is being very close to the MRT station very important to cut down time for you? Or is living beside a shopping mall a primary need that you think will be very essential for your family? Or maybe do you need to be within a kilometers from the primary school that your child might be entering into, because that might increase your chance of entering for the balloting period, whether is it phase 2A, B or C. So in Singapore, everybody is placing a lot of importance on the school choice, and of course, if that is your prime criteria, then focus on the ranking of all these preferences. It will be good to list down from a list of 1 to 5 or maybe 1 to 8 what is the priority need, because it's very hard sometimes to satisfy every singular preference, but at least the top 3 preferences must be settled so that your family will find that it's a joy to live in your new home. So step 2, I think, is research. Now research is extremely important. Now research minimizes our chance of having blind spots. Now a lot of times we might not know all the types of properties that's available in the market. There has been so many examples, countless times that buyers come to see our open houses at Propertylimbrothers, and then they feedback to us that after viewing our video home tours, they didn't know that this type of properties existed. So some of the buyers even mentioned that previously they were having certain kind of biasness against penthouses or ground floors, but after watching the home tour videos, they just realized that penthouses and ground floors are so unique and it's such a lifestyle change with so much more outdoor space for their kids, for their pets, and for their own lifestyle needs. Do more research so that minimizes your blind spot, because there are a lot of interesting properties in Singapore that you have not seen before, and even I have not seen before, although I've been doing real estate for the past 15 years. So I think spend some time online, go through all the major portals, try to look at some home tour videos in the market on YouTube channels, and then try to see what are some of the different houses that you might be interested in. When doing research, there are a ton of things that you might need to look through. Firstly, I think it will be beneficial to cut the whole Singapore island map into 5 different zones, which is north, south, east, west, and central area right in the middle of Singapore. So of course, right in the middle of Singapore, there's Macritchie Reservoir, but there are still a couple of nice properties in the Thomson area over there. But technically speaking, after you have looked through that 5 portions, try to discuss with your family which particular zone which you want to live in? Because a lot of us, when we grow up since childhood, we tend to have our own biasness towards certain zonings and certain areas. So for example, a lot of our clients and friends, they grow up maybe in the west area. If you ask them to move to the east area, they'll find that it's really strange to live in the east because their natural tendency is that west is a better part and a more homely part to live in. Perhaps also because when we grow up in a certain area, that's where our parents are still currently living at, and perhaps our siblings have also bought properties around our parents as they grow up and marry and have kids to be close to parents for family support, for the grandchildren and stuff like that. So naturally, try to discuss where will be the key area that you and your spouse prefer to live in certain parts of Singapore. So cut that Singapore element into 5 zones and then decide on the location. And one very important technique that you can use is, of course, you can zoom in based on the MRT station lines and try to work outwards from the MRT zonings. Of course, if MRT is not your main criteria, and because perhaps you and your wife both have vehicles you drive, then you can of course expand your scope away from the MRT station. After the zoning is done, after the particular locale of the train station is done, then zoom in into the age category and try to decide what kind of age bandwidth in terms of the particular property is suitable and is a certain need that you want. So for example, some clients, they are at a certain life stage that they are in their retirement years, 50, 55. So for this particular group of clients, buying an older property is not really much of an issue for them because they want to go for size. So they want to go for properties that have a lot of built-in areas, and they tend to think that buying properties that are perhaps like 30 over years old, 20 odd, or maybe even 40 years old in terms of private properties, having that huge amount of space, lower PSF, that is perfectly fine for them. And a lot of people in this age bandwidth, they're not taking much leverage, they are almost fully paying off the property for their retirement, so they are not too concerned about buying a newer property. But perhaps you might be in a life stage that you're in your early 30s or maybe your early 40s, and you might be a little bit concerned about buying properties that are a little bit older. So you might want to focus on properties that are within 10 years old or maybe below 15 years old, or maybe new launch developments. But of course, all of us know that Singapore properties have different phases. The new launch properties, of course, they are of a higher PSF, lower in terms of size range. Middle age group properties that are perhaps like 15 to 20 years old, they fall within the bandwidth that Singapore was launching at, perhaps a more sizable range in terms of sizes. So nowadays, new launch properties, a 3-bedder perhaps is about 900 over square feet. Properties in the 15 to 20-year-old range, 3-bedders might be in the 1,200, 1,400 plus square feet. Because if you go even older, perhaps like 25 to 35 years old types of properties, you might be able to get 3-bedders at about 1,400 all the way to perhaps like 1,600 square feet. Depending on which zone you're looking at, the third thing, as what we'll sum up, is the age balance of the particular private property that you're looking at. So I think the fourth thing is then to decide what will be your budget that you have in terms of a research, so that your research will be fruitful. I think there's no point because maybe you are planning to allocate about 1.5 million or maybe 1.6 million dollar for your next move. If you're looking at the wrong places and the wrong pricing, then you might be delaying your plan. So that would then bring us to step 3. Step 3, I think, is leverage. And property is, of course, one of the very rare assets in the world that allows all of us to take leverage. So, of course, we cover in our Investors series, some of the episodes, that why property is such a great asset because of leveraging. The key reason is because for a property that is perhaps, just for example's sake, $1 million, you only have to put out 25%, which is 250,000. That is not including the fees like the buyer's stamp duty and the legal fees and stuff like that. But having that 25%, that allows you to leverage for a property that is $1 million. Because if you need to save $1 million before you can buy a property, perhaps that will already cost you for the next 10 to 20 years just to save that amount. And leveraging is a fantastic thing that allows everybody to own assets in Singapore the moment you have that down payment. But of course, the next criteria is that if you want to leverage, you need to pre-plan your mortgage ability, because in Singapore, of course, you need to have that mortgage ability before the bank is willing to loan you. So do plan for this portion, because a lot of buyers have oversight on this portion, and while they are planning to buy their next home, they go ahead and switch jobs, and that will then jeopardize the time period for them to secure the next home. So importantly, if you're switching jobs, know that usually banks will want to see at least 3 months of pay slip, or if you're joining a big MNC, they want to see the employment letter. So do pre-plan your career change, your career switch, or some people are actually switching from a full-time career with a fixed salary amount per month into a self-employed kind of profession. So also note that for self-employed professions, banks, they have a haircut of 70% of your income, and they need to see at least 2 years of your NOA, which is your Notice of Assessment tax with IRAS. So that's very important, and sometimes just because of the job change, you delay your housing move for the next 1 to 2 years. Now that brings us to step 4, and step 4 is planning for your financial calculation for your current home to your next home. So I think that's a very important part, because if you fail to plan for the financial calculation in terms of mortgage ability plus monthly payments, then sometimes it might cause your family to enter into a very stressful situation if your next mortgage payment is of a higher tier that you're not comfortable to sustain. So very importantly, I think at least you must have a 12 months mortgage available in your CPF account or bank account as a reserve, just in case of a job loss, or just in case there are some issues at home. Perhaps you enter into a situation that you need to take a break from work because of health reasons and stuff like that. So very importantly, keep a 12 months buffer so that gives you enough time to plan for the next stage on how to sustain your mortgage payment. Of course, importantly, while doing this, it's very important to plan for the positioning of your ABSD planning, because nowadays a lot of people are moving towards getting a property under each name if both husband and wife are working. But of course, if only one party is working, then usually in order to utilize both CPF, they might go for 2 names for the next property. So that will be up to your own preference, whether you want to have one property in each name or one property in both names, depending on whether do you intend to get a second property or third property for your family. Of course, there are various options nowadays, buying properties in trust, asset under management and stuff like that, and that will be covered in our investor series as well on more details. Now, the important thing of calculating your financial calculation for your current home is because a lot of times the amount that is trapped under our current home in terms of CPF plus accrued interest and potential cash proceeds that will come out from your current place affects your budget for the next purchase. So importantly, calculate both ends, and once you have done the homework, then you have a better picture on whether do you have enough down payment and plus the loan eligibility based on your TDSR on calculating the next home total budget. Now, and step number 5 of the planning phase, I think, will be the timeline. So importantly, a lot of people fail to plan for the timeline, and timeline is one of the most stressful portion when you're doing a sale and purchase concurrently, because not only does that involve moving your belongings, your furniture, it involves moving your family, your kids, and sometimes when that is not planned correctly, your funds are trapped in your current home, it cannot be released in time, your CPF funds cannot come out in time. If you do not plan for alternatives like bridging loan, timing the sale and purchase in terms of timeline planning, then that will have dire consequences. So you need to know what are the exact steps, like when do you put in the option money for the next home, when do you exercise option for the next home, how do you plan the completion period, what should be the gap between the sale and purchase in terms of the number of days for completion so that your CPF funds can flow over, what are the pros and cons of using bridging loans. We have detailed topics on both our Investors and Us series. I'll provide all the link below down in the description so you can click and watch previous episodes. So we explain in detail on planning for a timeline right over there. Now with that, let's move on to step number 6, and step number 6 is the beginning of the preparation phase. Preparation phase is the mindset of a seller on how do you prep your home so that you do not lose out on any opportunity for buyers that are coming to view your home. Now, we all know that when you're selling your home, if this is your primary residence, the most important thing is that you need to start to adopt a mindset of a seller. So what do we mean by that? The very first thing is to know that the moment you have decided to put your property in the market, that property technically becomes your product. If you don't have that kind of mindset, most of the time there might be a lot of emotional attachment to your current home. So for example, I've lived in my previous home for a couple of years. It technically took me 2 years to convince my wife to move to a new home, which we shifted in recently in the past year, in the year 2020. So it took me 2 years, and there was a catalyst event, which is the arrival of my baby Ethan, so my 4th child. And of course, that catalyst event that made my wife starting to think about moving home as well, because we are having a shortage of space. So sometimes when you're moving your primary residence, although one of you might have intention to move home because perhaps you might think that, hey, why don't we move to a better location? Why don't we move to a bigger space? Why don't we get one more bedroom? But maybe your spouse might not agree. And most of the time, it might be the reason that you have lived in your current home for a couple of years already, and there are a lot of good memories that are being stored in the current home. Some of your first few kids have grown up, played in the home, and you guys have a lot of happy memories there. So I think importantly, a happy family is most important, and sometimes that shift, if it's just purely based on the investment angle for your primary residence, it might not be that fruitful if your whole family does not agree with that shift. So I think most of the time we need to have a clear mindset on the primary residence as fulfilling the family needs. The best thing is that it has an investment component inside that allows the asset to grow in value, or buy a good location so that in future if you want to switch home, it's not that tough. And versus a pure property that is purely for investment needs, because that property for investment needs, it will then be easier to just purely look at numbers, look at investment factors without considering the family's needs and preferences. Step number 7 is a step that you try to visualize yourself as the buyer. So what we usually do is that when we visit our clients to discuss about the sale of their property, and they engage PLB's professional help to help them to start to plan for the entire marketing campaign, open houses and stuff like that. The moment we walk into the property, we try to visualize, if we are the buyer walking into the home, what will we start to see? So you can do that exercise at home for yourself. Walk in your home, right from the door, have the mindset of a buyer, try to remove any form of emotional attachment with your own home, and try to ask yourself, after I have walked through this property, after I've seen this property in detail, what is number 1, my first impression on the first 8 seconds? Secondly, after I've finished viewing the home for the next 10 to 15 minutes, what are some of the obstacles and some of the objections that I have if I were to be the buyer? And of course, the third question to ask yourself is that, how much would you offer for this property? So you need to ask yourself that question, that if you are really a buyer, how much will you pay for your own home if you are the buyer right now that's trying to offer for this place? Now that will give you a very good sense on whether your property is ready to be placed in the market as a product to attract potential buyers. Now importantly, in Singapore, perhaps in the whole world, there's no perfect property. Every property has its pros and cons, and you need to decipher and find out what are the pros of your property. You need to showcase the pros, and of course, for the objections, everybody will be able to see the objections. You need to find ways and solutions on how to overcome these obstacles. Of course, buyers, they understand that every property has its own downside, it has its upside. But the moment that a buyer can see that the amount of upside based on their needs is more than the downside, they will make an offer for the property. So importantly is that if you see certain cracks on the wall, if you see certain cosmetic stuff, you need to spend a little bit of amount to touch up on that. We talk about all this in detail in a lot of our episodes as well. But importantly is that adopt the mindset of a buyer, walk into your property, ask yourself that 3 essential questions. Now, step number 8 is to decide on how you want to utilize your time. And of course, that will mean that whether do you want to DIY to sell your own property, or to get a professional help to sell your property by utilizing the services of a real estate agent or real estate team. Now, I think importantly is that this is the concept of opportunity, cost, and time. Because perhaps you might be having your own professional job, you're running your business. If you want to manage this entire project by yourself, definitely you need to invest time and effort to be home for viewings, to prep the home, to answer the buyers' inquiries, negotiate, paperwork and stuff like that. So I think importantly is to decide whether you want to be the main professional contractor for this project of selling and buying your home, or you want to seek the help of a professional agent or professional team to help you to take care from start to finish. So it's the same concept of doing renovation. Some clients, they like to self-manage their renovation projects. They want to be the project manager that engages all different contractors, carpenters, electrician, floor tiler, somebody that is doing painting, somebody that's doing wet work. So they want to be the main coordinator and the designer for their home. But of course, in exchange for that, they have to invest their own time, resource, and energy to manage for 2 to 3 months. So for the next step, step number 9 is to commence the sale process. Bear in mind, by commencing the sale process, this is the best phase for you to get feedbacks. A lot of people say that, hey, I'm not urgent to sell my home. I think that question arises because you have not found the next home that you might like to live in. So importantly, go back to the previous first 3 steps, do research. Once you're almost about 80% sure that this is the locale, these are the 3 to 4 projects that you will want to strongly consider the moment that you receive an offer for your current place, then commence the sale of a place. So do not commence the sale of a place before doing research. Importantly, know what you want to buy, know where you want to go to, know where you want to put your family in before commencing the sale of your home. Because importantly, you want to make sure that the sale is done in a fashion that the marketing campaign is launched with a bang. That means once you launch a property in the market, buyers that are hunting for properties and are serious buyers, they monitor the market in a very detailed fashion. So the moment they see a new listing in the market, they will come for viewings, especially during the first 2 to 3 weeks. And that's also the best time that you have to impress your buyers when they come for your open houses, for your viewings. Sometimes after a month of viewings, if you do not receive offers, you will sometimes notice that viewing rates tend to taper off a little bit because the first batch of buyers usually are ready buyers that have been monitoring new listings in the market for the past 2 to 3 months. So importantly, when you launch a property in the market, try to have a mindset that, hey, perhaps I want to set a 3 months time frame to seriously market my property and then to see how's the response and feedback, how do I improve on the next viewing experience and things like that. So of course, that will also comprise of home staging, whether do you want the video home tours to be done, how do you want to market your property, do you want to do passive or active marketing, which we have covered usually in our other topics as well. And before we move to step number 10, I think it's very important to also keep your negotiations flexible because negotiations are very dynamic, especially when you're planning the sale and purchase concurrently. You need to keep both ends of negotiation in a more flexible manner because sometimes, for example, if you really want the buyer for your current home to give you perhaps like a 3 months rent-free period or maybe to rent back the apartment to you for 3 months because you might want to do a one-time shift, that will then limit the amount of audience you have for your current home. So I would recommend to keep the conditions of sale in a more flexible manner, having the focus to put on the price target so that at least you know that the parameters are set in a fashion that if, let's say, the buyer's willing and able to give you an extension period to continue to stay in your current home for 3 months by paying them a fair market rental, then take that as a bonus. Because a lot of times buyers that are hunting for properties, they might have already sold their home. They're also looking to buy and to quickly renovate, to move in, to settle down their kids. So if your conditions are too lengthy, you will then narrow the amount of buyers that is available to suit your particular condition for the sale of your home. So I would say that put the price expectation as the first range, and of course secondly, you can determine based on several other conditions like what is the completion period, whether is there any rent back involved, the amount of deposit and stuff like that. Now step number 10 of course will be the timeline for the sale and purchase. Importantly, try to understand the key difference between what we call the 21 days planning period for CPF funds to flow from the old to the new home. Refer to some of the episodes that is in the link below. Also understand what is the key benefit of having bridging loan with the interest that you need to pay to the bank and without bridging loan, and what is the main benefit of having bridging loan is that you can save a couple of weeks of the time frame for your next purchase. So bearing that in mind, try to understand some of the key differences of these different approaches and then you can plan your next move pretty much easily. Of course, step number 11 is that once your deal is done, congratulations, but you still need to plan for your alternative accommodation, plan for a renovation period. Try to keep it flexible. If you need to rent for 6 months while you do a massive renovation for your next home, especially if you're buying a condo or if you're buying an apartment, the renovation period tends to take longer because there are stipulated time periods from MCST to renovate the property. If you're buying a landed property, that's going to take even longer if you're doing A&A or massive renovation or maybe even rebuild. So have that mindset to perhaps to rent for 6 months, 9 months, or maybe up to a year, depending on the amount of renovation that you're doing for the new home. So some very interesting on the ground kind of concept is that some of our clients, what they do is that if let's say they're buying a 3 or 4 bedder in this project, what they will do is that if they need to do massive renovation, they might rent a similar apartment in the same development as well so that the kids can get used to living in the same project, utilize the facilities while they wait for the renovation of that home to be completed. So with that, we have 11 steps, 5 steps in the planning phase, 5 steps in the preparation phase. We hope that this helped you with the 11 things that you need to know before planning to sell your home, and hope to see you soon. Meantime, take care.